Hello, time for another Brexit video. This time it's 1 week after, and it's been a bit of a roller coaster, of course, but I thought I would talk about it a bit more. So, how am I feeling a week after Brexit? Stressed, I think. Maybe for personal reasons, because I'm being divorced at the moment, but also because I believed in Brexit, and I still do. For me, it's the lack of democracy in the EU, the fact that the Commission is in charge of everything, and it really shouldn't be. And, of course, just because so many people who wanted to remain are kicking up such a fuss about having lost the vote. I can understand them being upset, but I kind of feel it's childish and frustrating. It's like they don't understand. But of course, whenever people have different opinions, they don't understand each other usually. And what's happening is just, I suppose it's just natural. But what of the economic shenanigans that's gone on this week? Like the stock market went down, it's gone up, the pound has gone down, things like this. What does it all mean, if anything? Now, a lot of the politicians, especially the Brexit ones, have been saying, well, look, the FTSE 100, it went down a lot, but it's recovered, and it's now 6.5% higher than it was to start with. And they're right. Okay. But, and in fact, it's actually higher than it has been at any time since something like last August, in fact. But I would say they shouldn't be quoting the FTSE 100, because it's not really that relevant to the British economy. They should be looking at the FTSE 250. The problem with the FTSE 100 is that something like 3/4 of the companies that are in it, they're big multinationals, they're the biggest companies in the country, basically. And these big multinationals do their trade, the bulk of their trade, outside Britain, and often not even in the British currency, in pounds. They often do their business internationally in dollars or euros, and other currencies even sometimes, and as far as I know. Now, the thing is, if the pound has gone down, and then they give us their results in dollars, right, they convert their dollars to pounds, their dollars now buy more pounds, so it makes their results look better in Britain. So, of course, their shares go up in Britain. Right. So it's not really relevant to the British economy. It gives a misleading result, the FTSE 100. I would say, though, that because the pound is now cheap, it's a great time for those companies to invest in Britain, because they can do it cheaply, right, relatively speaking. If they've got dollars, now's a great time for them to be spending money in this country. Think about that, levers. Okay. So let's look at the FTSE 250 instead. I'll put a chart up. You can see in this month it's lost a chunk, but it has since the vote regained about 2/3 of that. Okay. So again, it's not much of a problem really in being shown in the charts. And in fact, if I put up a 6-month chart, you see it's been this low before. Back in February, and in the longer term it's been trending down since something like 2014, just a little bit, really we're probably in the incipient stages of what they call a bear market or recession, and this has been kind of in the air for more than a year anyway, regardless of Brexit. Now, the shock is not going to help. It's probably going to maybe tip it over the edge a bit, or we might need a couple more shocks to really make it go. We'll get them. And so hold on to your hats, I think. Another problem with the British economy is our current accounts deficit. That is our, what we call the balance of payments. That is our trade deficit with the rest of the world, deficit or surplus. It includes dividend payments and interest payments to the rest of the world, and foreign aid and things that we, if you like, pay out of our bank account as a nation. And you can see in the chart that actually it's been going down pretty much since we joined the EU. I've put a chart up of the balance of payments as compared with GDP, because that kind of cancels out the effects of inflation, which makes it look worse. The deficit is currently about £32 billion, about 6 or 7% of our GDP on the whole. And this has to be paid for, okay. But you can see it's been trending down, and the EU has not been helping. We have something like an 80 billion deficit in trade each year with the EU, which is a huge amount of money to be losing, and we have not been able to turn that around since we've been a member. Structurally, we used to, up until the 60s, we used to have a balanced balance of payments, and the political parties kind of had a consensus that we should maintain a balanced account. So the deficit was always kind of in the region of zero. Now that consensus has been lost, and the government has been encouraging people to be consumers, basically, and spend money that we can't afford. At the same time running down manufacturing industry and boosting services, but you see it's not working. And this has been going on for a long time. Brexit may actually help this, because if what some people say is right, the EU is part of the problem here. We have a trade deficit with the EU. That 80 billion presumably isn't going to go away, but if we trade more with the rest of the world and less with Europe, maybe the situation can improve a bit. That's how it was back in the 60s and 50s and so on. We just have to wait and see, but it's something to be borne in mind. When the economy reconfigures itself, maybe this deficit will start to come back to something sensible. And as for the pound, of course, it has fallen. If you look at the 1 month chart, it's down against the dollar, right? Quite a chunk. But to put it in context, look at the 10-year chart, okay? And you see that, yes, it's lowest now than it has been in that period, but it's still in the same ballpark. It's still in the same general region as it has been since the crisis of 2008, when our government took steps to allow the pound to fall drastically, as you can see. The government knows that a falling pound can be a good thing, and that's why they did it in 2008, right? In that crisis, our economy was one of the strongest in the world, and the government pushed the pound down, or allowed it to fall. And it's still in that area. The idea of allowing it to fall is to try and boost our economy, to encourage exports, to make it cheaper for foreign companies to invest in this country, things like that. So the pound falling, it will put up some prices of some imports, which will improve our current account deficit if we stop buying foreign goods a little bit. And it will make our exports a bit cheaper. Now, the falling pound didn't do much for exports back in 2008, but remember there was a worldwide collapse then, and other countries were struggling and in trouble as well. But now, this particular situation is that the EU is flatlining and not recovering, but other parts of the world have recovered a bit. Not fully, or not much at all, but a bit. Remember that interest rates are still close to zero around the world, which means we are in a Great Depression. Depressions last historically 20, 25 years, 15 sometimes. The world moves faster these days. Maybe this depression will be shorter, but we've been in it certainly since 2008, and probably in a disguised form before then. Of course, the government doesn't talk about it. They don't want people to know that we're in a depression. But just look at interest rates. The historical average for this country is 7% or so. So 0%, that means we're in trouble. And we have been for a long time. And we're even slightly now into negative interest rates this week. Just slightly, I think 0.03%, just a tiny bit negative. Like Germany, Japan, these countries are depressed as well. And the low interest rates are to try and boost trade, effectively, and to cheapen government debts. That's why they think they can sustain a deficit, because the interest rates on it are low. But it isn't good for the long run. Deficit spending can be a good thing because it can, again, it provides jobs. It can help boost the economy if they spend it on sensible infrastructure. Personally, I think they should invest directly in business. For some reason, governments don't like to do that. Maybe because their role really is politics and not running businesses. They know nothing much about it. But I think they should make money available for business. They're trying to do it through the banks, but the system of getting companies into debt, I'm not sure is a good way of doing it somehow. I think grants would be better. Just give the money to them and the hell with it. Okay, it's lost anyway, so why make the bankers a profit when you can just give the money to the companies anyway? I don't really get it as a rational proposition. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Anyway, so what we are facing at the moment really is investors repositioning, and we're seeing the situation. And although it looks bad, I think the British economy is now slightly in a better position. In fact, okay, because of these changes, that is the way economies rebalance. Now, I'm not an economics expert, and I think these issues are controversial. I know that some people will say, no, it's a disaster. Leave your comments below. I'm happy to read them and revise my opinions if necessary, if I'm wrong. And I know that in the long run we're not going to know for a long time. And for the people who voted to remain, I would just say, please don't look at these very short-term fluctuations and treat them as significant, because I really do think it's a mistake to focus on the short term. We are not going to know whether this move has been good for 10 years. Okay, really. Things are going to be difficult because the world is in a depression anyway, and this kind of massive economic reconfiguring is just the sort of thing that's needed in the long term to get the world out of depression. It's not just our economy that needs to change. The United States one is in a bad way. Europe is in a terrible position. All these, Japan, these countries, Russia, the whole world is in a bad economic position, and massive reconfiguration of economies is what gets you out of depressions in the long run. And we are starting to do that in a serious way, and it's a good thing long term, I'm sure. So let's hope I'm right, basically. But so see it from the very, very big picture. In the short term, it looks like a crisis, and of course the powers that be and the globalist conspirators, if there is such a thing, certainly the multinationals, want us to think it's a crisis and a bad thing, because they want to maintain their control over us. They want us to keep buying their goods and being uneducated enough to just accept the losses of freedoms which go with rampant capitalism. pirate capitalism, really. Good capitalism is a good thing, but these super multinationals are monopolistic in nature, which is autocratic, dictatorial, anti-competition, anti-capitalist. They are, in fact, giant socialist organisations pretending to be capitalist, and we need to get them under control. And this move is the beginning of the end, if we're lucky, for that way of doing business in the world. Maybe I'm really over-optimistic there, but people need to be made conscious of what's going on the big scale, how the multinationals corrupt the politicians, especially in America and in the EU, by funding their campaigns in America and in the EU. It's the lobbying that goes on around the world. Those companies can afford to lobby and get rules implemented which favour them and which don't favour their competitors, which are small and new businesses starting up, medium companies, where at the moment most business is actually done. The rules make it difficult for those companies to compete because they have to spend money complying, which they can't afford. Okay. As I say, the big corporations are monopolistic in nature. They believe in capitalism for everyone else and socialism for themselves. State support. And it's disgraceful, really. And I'm very much hopeful that the shock of Brexit will help to reconfigure the British economy over time in a strategic way, which makes it more democratic, more accountable, and the EU too. Actually, we really do need to put control back in the hands of people and not unaccountable corporations and unaccountable bureaucracies. This is a first move, but it's like we've won a battle, but we have not in any sense won the war. But I want people to become more conscious of this sort of thing because it's really important in the long run, especially the young people who were very keen on remaining, thinking about jobs, thinking about what's in it for them, as people do, thinking about convenience, freedom of travel and things of this sort. These little rewards are handed out to people to keep us docile, I think. And they are good benefits, of course. We do need jobs. They're not there just to keep us docile. They're there to keep us enslaved. but we do need them, unfortunately. It's the best we can do at the moment as a way of providing for people. And people are right to be concerned about jobs. The Leave voters are right. The Remain voters are right to be concerned about jobs. Sorry. With this little reconfiguration, we may well suffer a bit, but we might not, because with the cheaper pound, investment in the country can go up. It's just whether people want to. And the idea is the pound has come down to cancel out the fact that people maybe don't want to so much. So on the one hand, we look a bit less attractive to some investors. On the other hand, it's cheaper now, so maybe it's all right. And that's kind of the idea. And the market thinks it should go down about that much, and probably the market's probably right. And it's being sold as a horrible, horrific thing, but it's probably a good thing. The pound has been devaluing for all of the 20th century, long-term trend. Way back at the beginning of, was it the 20th century or the 19th century? I can't remember now. It was about $12 to the pound, and it's been trending down slowly since then. So this is nothing new. Okay. So, with that in mind, what do I make of this referendum petition with about 4 million signatures so far? Although I read today that 77,000 fraudulent signatures have been removed. Like something like 40,000 residents of Vatican City voted. It only has a population of 800. 30,000 South Koreans voted. That country has almost no internet access. Things like that. So those 77,000 votes have been removed because they're fraudulent. But for the people who are voting for a re-referendum here, I mean, to me it doesn't make any rational sense. I mean, you lost the vote, and I fully understand you being gutted about that, because it was such an important issue. It's not just a little thing. It's really, we all, I think, people who voted, not all of us, many of the people who voted realise it's an important thing. And those people are very upset by the way the vote has gone, the ones who wanted to remain. But would you be signing this petition if the vote had gone the other way by 4%? Would you say there should be a 75% quorum and a 60% majority to remain? No, so I think it's hypocritical to be, and childish actually, to be upset with the result and saying no, let's have best out of 3, as Farage put it. It's nonsense, I think. Why should you require a 75% turnout, for example? This is just because the actual turnout was 72%, right? Otherwise you might have said, if the turnout was 50%, you might have said, well, we should have had a 60% turnout. Why 75%? Why not 80%? Why not 73%? 75% is a round number. That's its only significance, and it's more than 72%. Secondly, why do you want 60% majority before taking us out of the EU? Just because it's an important decision. Why not a 66% majority, a 2/3 majority? That's a nice sort of round number. I don't see a reason why 50% plus one extra vote shouldn't be enough. With an important issue, maybe there should be some higher threshold, like there is in some parliaments, or in the EU Council sometimes you have to have a unanimous decision on certain issues. But this was not the way the referendum was framed, and this was explained to the public in the first place. It's going to be a majority vote, flat majority vote. Make your mind up. Okay. And I think people want a re-referendum because many people, in fact, didn't vote and regret it. I think the turnout among young people was higher, much higher than usual, but it was around about an average of 60% or so. And the turnout amongst older people was more like 75% or so. And that did affect the results. But look, this is just what it's like to be an adult, right? If you are given a responsibility and you have to make a responsible decision, then you must take the responsibility seriously. Really, that's it. Otherwise you have to live with the consequences. And that's what's happened, perhaps. I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me. There were 15,000 young people who went to Glastonbury, and quite a few old people too, paying £300 to £500 for a ticket. Right, 15,000 potential voters who probably didn't vote because it's pretty inconvenient to vote from Glastonbury. Okay, and there were many more who couldn't be bothered to register to vote, didn't bother to find out. That's up to you. If you think a rock concert is more important, especially if you spent £500 on a ticket, I can't blame you for that, but the outcome is what it is, partly as a result, and that was your choice. The referendum was known about well in advance. C'est la vie. I am a little uncomfortable that the margin was so narrow. And this is going to be a bone of contention, I think, for people. But in the end, we all knew how the referendum was constituted, and it was up to us, young and old, to decide whether or not to vote and how to vote, and to check the facts beforehand. There are articles that I've seen online saying that after the vote, searches on Google spiked for phrases like, "What is the EU?" This is Google in the UK. I mean, guys and gals, you're supposed to do your research before the vote. Okay. But don't worry, I can assure you, EU stands for Elephant's Underpants. And that's why we had to get out. Right, so don't worry, it's okay. Right. Actually, there's another campaign or petition somewhere, I think it's on Avaz or something like that, asking for it to be mandatory for politicians' campaign statements to be checked for their truth, and for them to be challenged on their truthfulness. Again, I feel this is misconceived and unnecessary. It's misconceived because people have different interpretations of facts anyway, and it's very hard sometimes to establish what is true and what is false. But we did have fullfact.org checking facts online, free for anyone to go and look at. I looked at it. How many of the voters looked at it? Not many. Well, it's up to them. Again, as I say, if you're given a responsible decision, take it seriously. Be responsible. This referendum really is, I think, a wake-up call to people who have been blasé about the value and the powers of democracy. For people who don't value democracy, perhaps this has been a wake-up call on just how important it is that A, it exists, and B, we take it seriously, and C, we try our best to keep it working. And people should be held accountable for their lies. And when they're in positions of responsibility, they should possibly be prosecuted when they lie. But we did have the opportunity to check facts, and most people didn't take that opportunity. Most people voted by emotion. Most people are not really intellectual enough to cut through the maze of bullshit which there was online from both sides. In my videos, I spent several videos trying to cut through it and find real facts. And why I decided to vote Brexit was my final conclusion on that, which I discussed democracy, I discussed immigration, I discussed the economy, and that's it. And some people accuse me of being racist because of my feelings on immigration. Just for the record, I totally dispute that. People who mention immigration and foreigners are not racist by default. It's just silly. Okay. Racism is about superiority of this or that race and things like that, and I do think it's stupid. Okay. The British are not superior. Trust me. I've been abroad. So what else has happened this week? Chaos in the Tory party and the Labour Party. Again, I think this is a good thing. What we're seeing here, again, is something which is fundamental to human nature. And whenever we, as a species, are in a position where things are going badly or our situation has suddenly changed dramatically, and we feel that our leadership is not in a position to do the right thing or doesn't want to or something like that, where things can't be done peacefully, we do them by revolution. Where they can be done peacefully, we do them peacefully, usually by arguing and having votes and things like that. And this is what the Labour Party and the Tory Party are now doing. And I believe this is normal, appropriate human nature, and it's adaptive in an evolutionary sense. It's good for Britain that we seek out new leadership adapted to the new situation. People we think are going to be better at dealing with it than the ones who got us where we are. It's kind of like the Second World War in Britain. Winston Churchill was one of the greatest leaders in British history and perfect for World War II. I mean, he got us through it, he inspired the whole population. And then right after the war, an election was held and he was kicked out, bang, much to his shock. But the people felt, probably rightly, that he was the perfect leader for the war, but they did not want his policies implemented after the war. No National Health Service, things like that. No, thank you. So, humans are very, very clever collectively at organising themselves and reorganising themselves when need be. And this chaos in our politics, even though it's stressful and sometimes funny to watch, it's really a good thing. And it will fit us more to dealing with what we have to deal with now. And we may have an election as well, and we'll see, because I think the parties will have to be pretty responsible in how they deal with that election. Because the Remain the Leave campaign's lies are being challenged, but the Remain campaign had lots of lies too, which I talked about in my videos before. And, well, I think their credibility is at an all-time low, both sides. And we do need better politicians. Frankly, I think the two main parties should be disposed of. We don't really need them anymore. Neither of them is representative of their voters anymore, of their traditional constituency, if you like, anymore. We should get rid of political parties altogether, frankly, and just have independent MPs, I think. It would be harder to ascertain what they generally believe in, but that would encourage a responsible attitude among the voters. Do the research. Find out. We have the internet now. We can look it up and spend a couple of hours, maybe, looking at things. Just be adults, right? Grown up. Now, another situation that arose, of course, immediately was Scotland. Scotland voted consistently and significantly to remain inside the EU by a good majority, 60% or so. Okay. And every region as well. And so did London. But Scotland is thinking, hey, hang on, we're going to be taken out of the EU against our will. Perhaps we should leave the UK and stay in the EU. I don't know how they can manage that under EU rules, but something can be negotiated, you know. Something can be done. Probably. But for me, I think they need to think about this carefully, because Scotland actually exists already in another single market. There are two single markets. The EU and the United Kingdom is also a single market. It's not run in the disgusting way the EU one is, but it does have freedom of movement and all that, as it happens. Right. Now, the thing is, as far as I can make out, 70% of Scotland's trade is with the rest of the United Kingdom. The UK's trade with the EU is about 44% and falling. But the UK Scotland trade is 70% of Scotland's trade is with the UK. Do they want trade barriers there? If they're in the EU, there will be trade barriers with the UK, depending on what's negotiated, but presumably there will be some tariffs of some sort. That could be a bad thing for Scotland. They will get handouts from the EU, which, of course, they get subsidies on things, so they'll have to contribute, presumably, though, out of their own money, however. But maybe on balance they'll be a net recipient from Germany, presumably. That's something to be considered as well. if they separate from the UK, of course they'll stop getting subsidies from England. Big difficulties for Scotland. They really have to think about that hard. I think it will be... I originally thought when they had the referendum a while ago that it would be a good thing if Scotland left the UK. It would be a good thing for England because we are subsidising them while we steal their oil. Okay, but maybe now I'd have to think it through again, because the breakup of the United Kingdom maybe is not such a great idea. It's worked pretty well for 300 years. We have a similar situation in Northern Ireland as well, but the vote was more mixed there. What's going to happen? Don't know. Now, I've said that I'm against the referendum petition, but that doesn't mean we won't necessarily have a second referendum. As I say, we've won the battle, but we haven't won the war. When referendums have gone against the EU in the past, they've had second referendums in those countries for the most part, until the vote has gone the way they want, with opt-outs added in. And I'm concerned about this because at the moment the politicians both in Britain and in the EU are saying, no, Britain must leave, we're not going to have a second referendum, Britain must leave, that was the vote, that's the decision. The EU politicians are saying it, the British politicians are saying it. But politicians are liars, right? And I'm concerned that they're saying that now, and that means, actually, they're only mentioning it because, actually, in the back of their minds, they're thinking, maybe we could have a second referendum. We'll let Britain negotiate a few opt-outs here and there, okay. Somehow, with difficulty, okay. And then we'll put a fresh referendum to the British people and trick them into staying in this undemocratic, dangerous organisation with its failing economy and dictatorial EU Commission in control of all the laws. We also have the globalists, if they exist as such, who would probably want Britain to stay in because it makes it easier for them to control us. As I mentioned before, with all the EU regulations and what have you, and so on. So they would also try and manipulate the British economy, possibly by not investing so much in this country and trying to make it tough for us for a couple of years while the negotiations proceed. We do have to watch out for this, I think, and I want to try and make sure there isn't a second referendum and that this vote is final, unless I change my mind. But I'm fairly comfortable that we've made the right decision, not too narrowly for comfort. As I said earlier, I don't really feel that people fully get the seriousness of the importance of democracy and having an accountable Parliament. I know our House of Lords isn't elected, but still our Parliament is in the end accountable to the public, whereas the EU system is not, despite the fact we have Parliament there and an EU Council. It is not accountable to its electorate, as we have seen many times with these repeated referenda and rules and regulations which people object to. Sometimes they do get reversed a bit, but sometimes it just doesn't listen. And the expressed attitudes of some of the commissioners doesn't give me any comfort, really. So that's my take on the last week. I don't really have much more to say about it at the moment. Okay, if you have any comments, then please leave them below. And I'll see you next time. Maybe at some point I'll get to talk about some other subject, I don't know. But that's it for now. Bye.